Picture this, you're a monk in the Middle Ages, you're living in a sprawling cold stone monastery. It's Lent, the long 40-day fast before Easter, and solid food is strictly forbidden from sunrise to sunset. Your stomach is growling, a constant hollow ache, but while your plate is empty, your hands are full of a heavy, frothy stein of beer. While the rest of the world fasted on bread and water, medieval monks discovered a holy loophole, a divine technicality in the strict rules of fasting. The rule was, thou shalt not eat. It said nothing about what you could drink. And so, beer became their secret weapon against starvation. It wasn't just a beverage, it was a survival tool. This clever interpretation didn't just get them through Lent, it transformed monasteries into the first great breweries of Europe. Monks became master brewers, and their liquid bread didn't just sustain their bodies, it shaped the very fabric of medieval life. Today we're uncorking the incredible story of the brewing monks. We'll explore how they used beer to hack their fasts, how they perfected the art of brewing into a science, and how their heavenly creations influenced the world for centuries to come. This is the story of how a religious loophole gave us some of the best beer on earth. So why beer? Why not just stick to water? To understand this, you have to understand the medieval mindset about fasting. The rules, especially during Lent, were incredibly strict. No meat, no dairy, no eggs, and in many cases no solid food at all during the daylight hours. The goal was to purify the soul through the denial of the flesh. But there was a practical problem. Water, the most obvious alternative, was often a death sentence. Rivers and wells were frequently contaminated with waste and bacteria. Diseases like cholera and dysentery ran rampant. Drinking from the local stream was a game of Russian roulette. Beer, on the other hand, was a miracle of public health. The brewing process itself was a purification system. First, the water was boiled, killing off most of the harmful pathogens. Then, the fermentation process, driven by yeast, created alcohol, which acted as a natural preservative and antiseptic. The slightly acidic nature of beer also made it a hostile environment for germs. The result? A drink that was safer, cleaner, and more reliable than almost any water source available. But safety was only half the story. The other half was pure, unadulterated energy. Fasting is draining. You need calories to function, to pray, to work the fields, and to copy manuscripts for hours on end. Water has 0 calories. Beer, however, was packed with them. A strong monastic ale, often called a doppelbock or double bock, could contain as many as 600 calories per liter. It was a liquid power source. For a monk trying to survive a 40-day fast, a few mugs of this potent brew weren't just a comfort, they were essential fuel to keep the body and soul together. This leads us to one of the most fascinating concepts from this era: beer as liquid bread. The term wasn't just a poetic nickname, it was a literal description. The beers brewed by monks for fasting periods, known as Fastenbier, were nothing like the light, fizzy lagers we often drink today. Imagine a thick, dark, malty brew. It was often unfiltered, leaving behind nutritious yeast and grain particles. It was sweet from the unfermented sugars, rich with carbohydrates, and deeply satisfying. It was a meal in a glass. In fact, some historians argue that these monastic ales were more nutritious than the daily diet of many peasants, which often consisted of little more than a coarse, dry loaf of bread. These beers were a lifeline. In some monasteries, it was common for a monk to drink several liters of this liquid bread throughout the day. It staved off the gnawing hunger pangs, provided vital energy for their daily labors, and offered a source of comfort in the cold, austere environment of the monastery. Let's be honest, fasting for over a month is miserable. A good strong beer not only nourished the body, but also warmed the spirit. It was a small sanctioned pleasure in a life defined by discipline and denial. This liquid sustenance was the key to making their spiritual devotion physically possible. The constant need for a safe, nutritious, and high-quality beverage turned monasteries into unintended centers of innovation. They became the Silicon Valley of medieval brewing. While brewing had existed for thousands of years, it was often a rustic, inconsistent affair done in individual households. Monks changed all that. Why were they so good at it? Well, monks had a few key advantages. First, they were literate. They could read, write, and keep meticulous records. This was a game changer. They documented everything: the types of grain they used, the temperature of the mash, the length of the boil, and the results of fermentation. They conducted experiments, tweaking their recipes over generations. What worked was written down and passed on. What failed was recorded as a lesson. This was a systematic scientific approach to brewing that was simply unheard of at the time. Second, they had the resources and the organization for large-scale production. Monasteries were self-sufficient communities with land to grow their own barley and hops. They had the manpower for the labor-intensive brewing process, and the wealth to build dedicated brewhouses. This expertise wasn't kept entirely behind monastery walls. Monks were also pillars of their communities. They provided hospitality to travelers and pilgrims, and a refreshing, safe beer was a cornerstone of that hospitality. Soon they began selling their surplus beer to the public. This wasn't just about making a little extra money, it was a vital part of their mission. Famous brewing orders like the Benedictines and the Cistercians, particularly the Trappists, became legendary for their beer. And the incredible thing is, some of these traditions are alive and well. Trappist breweries in Belgium and the Netherlands are still making beer today using methods and a philosophy that stretches back over 1,000 years. As their reputation for quality grew, so did the demand. And that's where beer went from being a tool for survival to a powerful economic engine. The sale of beer became a major source of income for monasteries across Europe. A monastery that could produce thousands of gallons of high-quality, sought-after beer had a significant commercial advantage. The profits from these sales were huge, and they were funneled directly back into the monastery's mission. This beer money funded the construction of magnificent churches and cathedrals. It paid for the creation of libraries, filled with priceless hand-copied manuscripts. It supported the operation of schools, providing education in an age of widespread illiteracy, and it funded hospitals and almshouses, allowing monks to care for the sick and the poor. In this way, beer became a force for social good. A monastery's brewery wasn't just a business, it was the financial heart of its charitable and educational work. Their brewing prowess gave them immense influence in their local communities. They became major employers and landowners, and their beer was a staple of daily life. And it wasn't just for monks and travelers. For most people in the Middle Ages, including children, beer was the default drink. Not the strong stuff, of course. They drank what was called small beer, a very low alcohol version that was brewed using the leftover grains from the main batch. It was hydrating, had some nutritional value, and was crucially much safer than water. The monastic breweries, with their consistent and large-scale production, helped make beer the common drink of Europe. So how did the monks justify this? How did they reconcile brewing and drinking vast quantities of beer with a life of piety and asceticism? For them, there was no contradiction. Beer was seen as a gift from God, or donum Dei. It was a natural product created from grain and water, transformed by the miracle of fermentation. It sustained life, prevented illness, and made their rigorous fasting possible. Some monks even argued that it aided in their spiritual duties. It's hard to focus on prayer and contemplation when you're weak and dizzy from hunger. A nourishing beer quieted the stomach, allowing the mind to focus on God. The B vitamins from the yeast, which we now know are crucial for mental and physical health, genuinely would have made them feel better and more focused. Of course, not everything was quite so holy. Human nature is what it is, and there are plenty of records of church leaders complaining that some monks were, let's say, enjoying the liquid bread loophole a little too enthusiastically. There were reports of drunkenness and rowdiness in certain monasteries, proving that even holy men weren't immune to the temptations of a good, strong ale. But for the most part, beer was seen as a blessing, a necessary and welcome part of the monastic routine. The legacy of these brewing monks is still with us today, in every pint of a Trappist ale or a German Doppelbock. They took beer from a simple rustic drink and elevated it into a craft. They pioneered quality control, recipe development, and large-scale production. The very idea of beer as a hearty, nutritious beverage, the concept of liquid bread, can be traced directly back to those cold monasteries and the monks who needed to survive Lent. Today, many of the world's most famous and respected beer brands like Chimay, Westmalle, or Rochefort are still brewed by Trappist monks, continuing a tradition of quality and devotion that has lasted for a millennium. So the next time you enjoy a rich, dark malty beer, take a moment to appreciate its history. You're not just drinking a beverage, you're tasting the legacy of medieval monks who, through a clever blend of piety, necessity, and ingenuity, turned water and grain into a gift from God. They didn't just survive their fasts, they created a liquid legacy that has enriched the world. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please give this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel for more stories like this. And hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next adventure into the past. Cheers!